Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are At the Desk. I'm your host, Brandon Cuck, and in today's episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the DeSantis presidential campaign, Julius Caesar, and Jeffrey Epstein and his list. Now come, take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome to ATD. First, we're going to be sending it over to our politics panel to discuss drama in President Biden's cabinet and a review of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm Ryan Lowy, joined alongside Yaya One, Jordan Spagnoli, and Jackson Tortone. Welcome into our politics panelists. Tonight, we look into President Biden's decision to keep U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in his administration after he kept secret hospital visits for 3 days. His trips were via ambulance from the Pentagon to Walter Reed National Military Center in Bethesda, Maryland. While in the hospital, his responsibilities were left to his deputy, who was vacationing out of the country. Also tonight, we look back at a campaign that, much like the Titanic, hit an iceberg while at top speeds. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' campaign hit the ground running in May of 2023, as he found himself neck and neck with former President Donald Trump before just months later spiraling downward to competing with former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley for second place. But first, Republicans are calling on Congress. They want to end Lloyd Austin's tenure in the Biden administration. Your thoughts?
I honestly don't think that he should resign over this. However, I do think that him not reporting his diagnosis of cancer to the White House was a terrible mistake. I mean, he's our Secretary of Defense Secretary. That's not some small job position, some forgettable White House employee. He's in charge of keeping our country safe, basically, after the president. And that was a huge error. I understand wanting to keep this type of stuff private, especially if it's not that bad. Maybe he didn't want to worry people or anything like that. But when you're working at such a high level position, you have to let somebody even higher up know. I personally don't think it's worth resigning over, but I do think that any new measures that are going to be put in place by the White House are necessary, because if this type of stuff happens, people need to know. Certain people need to know.
No, I completely agree with you. I think it was a big mistake. You can't keep secrets like that. I understand maybe not wanting the general public to know, because when you're in a position like that, you have a very important job. You don't want to worry the public. I understand that part, but the president is your boss, and not having him informed, God forbid something happened, the president looks stupid, the number two that isn't there to take his place looks stupid, all because they didn't keep him informed. They didn't keep each other informed. I think communication is key. You want to keep it on the down low out of the press, that's fine, but you need to let your staff know, because what if something happened? And thank goodness nothing happened, but what if something happened? Defense Secretary, that is a very important job.
It's a very important role.
And not having your number one Defense Secretary in there because he's out with an illness, cancer, which is a pretty big deal, and no one knew, I think it was a big mistake on his part.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I don't think this is an offense that is worthy of resigning, but I do think that he definitely should have let somebody know, because especially given the state of the world right now with all the conflicts going on and there's always the possibility of an attack on America. We need the number one guy in there if he can be there, and the fact that he let no one know is a problem, and I do think that he should have let somebody know.
Well, I mean, I think foreign politics is such a tricky situation. I mean, there's a lot of factors to look at. And so you really do never know when something happens. And this really is not a good look for the Biden administration going into this election year. I think this could definitely hurt his campaign.
It makes his foreign policy look even worse than it already is.
He's hitting record low numbers. He's in the 30s in terms of approval ratings. But we're going to now shift back to the Republican side of things. We're going to talk about Ron DeSantis, who just about a week ago ended his presidential campaign. He obviously started off, he hit the ground running. He was doing great. He was neck and neck with Donald Trump. He then all of a sudden found himself racing with Ambassador and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Jackson, tell me, were you surprised by him dropping out after just the first round in Iowa?
I was not surprised at all. Now, obviously, at the beginning, he was competing with Trump, in the beginning of the campaign. But all of a sudden, Republican voters started to figure out, we don't really care about the primaries as much. We care about winning against Biden in November. And
Unification.
Exactly. And they realized that Ron DeSantis is not that guy. He is not the guy that can beat Biden. There was one person who can beat Biden, and that is Trump. DeSantis had way too far-right political views. He had views that were anti-gay. He had views that were anti-abortion. He had all these views that, moderate people will never vote for in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, all these, swing states. And DeSantis' views would never survive in the modern day political world because of how outdated they are to most moderate people. And that's why I think that he dropped out so early like this.
I agree with you. I think DeSantis would not have made it to the presidential stage. However, I was surprised to hear of his dropping out just because I had predicted that Haley would have dropped out before him just because she was basically dead last between the three. DeSantis didn't have much of a lead, but it was a lead regardless. So I thought he was going to fight to the bitter end. So I was very surprised because he seemed like he really wanted it. And for a while, like Ryan said, he was really popular and he seemed like he was the only contender, a real viable candidate besides Trump. But I think after Trump's indictments, like people just kind of pushed him to the side. I mean, compared to Trump, he's very much overshadowed. He's not as charismatic. He's not as bold. Like Jackson said, his views are super right-wing. I mean, even going to the AP African American Studies curriculum that he wanted to push out, nobody was for that. So I personally was surprised that he dropped out, but I didn't really see him going far anyways.
I think I would have expected him to last a little bit longer into this campaign, but I'm not surprised that he did drop out. His numbers towards the end weren't looking great. I mean, I think it's safe to say we're leaning towards Trump here with this Republican candidacy. But his whole campaign was a really interesting one to dissect because in the beginning you have the attacks between him and Trump going at each other, AI-generated photos that weren't true or real, and those getting thrown around. It really felt like this Republican race was more about how can we tear the other person down rather than, oh, here's what I stand for, here's my policies. My other issue with his campaign was it felt a lot of attacks, but also his past and what he's done in the past policy-wise as governor and his time in office, rather than maybe focusing more on what are you going to do if you win office? What steps do you want to take? And I think that's where he lost support. But also there was those news cycles where in his speeches he did great, but in person, face-to-face conversations like this, he wasn't very personable, and that really turned a lot of voters away from him because they didn't see him as someone that can communicate effectively in more intimate relationship conversations.
And on that, like his debating performances were awful. He was up there looking like a dud. He was making he had terrible facial expressions. I think he was terrible in the debates.
Well, it could go both ways because people said that he beat Haley a lot of times because
that's because Haley was worse than him.
I can agree. He campaigned on getting things done. He kept saying, I kept China out of the state of Florida. He said even the liberals who don't like me would look into it and they would find that I kept China out of the state of Florida. And true or not, he really made that sound promising. He really made Nikki Haley not look good considering her history as UN ambassador, the way she communicated with China. So I honestly have to disagree with you, but I think at the end of the day, we can agree that Donald Trump was the real winner in the whole thing. He never took DeSantis seriously.
I think the debates were just bad in general. I think Donald Trump was able to win by a landslide without even competing in them, and that's why. That shows how bad the debates were.
I mean, Ramaswamy left him alone as well.
That's true.
Ramaswamy didn't poll very well. He didn't hit very high, but he pulled a lot of people down.
He did.
He never pulled DeSantis down, so that's where DeSantis dodged a bullet.
I think you say he dodged a bullet. I think it just means he was forgettable. I mean, I feel like Ramaswamy saw Nikki Haley as maybe not more of a threat, but somebody worth poking at and like somebody that could, his antagonizing of Haley really kind of put him like center stage. I feel like he just saw Ron DeSantis as just some governor from Florida that likes to pretend he's Trump, but he's not really worth dealing with. So I personally found Ron DeSantis very forgettable in the debates. I felt like he came on really strong at the beginning, and then he just kind of faded away into the background, and he watched everybody kind of go at it with each other, and he would chime in. But if you ask me right now, like there's no standout moments for me, really, that show like DeSantis as a strong candidate, other than the fact that I just don't agree with his policy issues at all. So that's what I would remember. But other than that, he's forgettable.
He campaigned on getting things done. That was his thing to say. He always said that Nikki Haley, she's fighting for her donors. Trump is fighting for himself. And he always said he's fighting for you, but he was never personable.
Well, I think the interesting thing to look at now is maybe why do we think he dropped when he did? Well, for one, in one of his campaigns, one of his speeches, he did mention that he would pardon Trump if Trump was ever convicted. I think that was a smart move on his part, trying to keep the peace there. But now that he's dropped, I think in his video he said, well, I don't see a clear path to victory, therefore I don't want to use the resources, waste the resources. But I think even deeper than that, like you said, very conservative. He wasn't going to win the moderate vote. And he needs to start thinking about his career after this? What is he going to do in the next election cycle? Where does he want to be? Does he want to try to be in Trump's staff if he wins this November? I think that is probably also a very big part to him dropping out, is to start thinking, okay, what's next? Where can I position myself to move forward?
That's a very good point.
Yeah, I think he's very well positioned, actually, because even though he begrudgingly endorsed Trump, we've seen that in the Republican Party, that actually can take you a very long way. So I think his endorsement is very important. I mean, even Trump himself mentioned this. He said, after it was a whole switch up from going months of disparaging him, emasculating DeSantis, and just saying, he even said, I endorsed him and he became a rocket ship in 24 hours. Now he's like a wounded bird falling from the sky.
Yeah.
I mean, he did a complete 180, and he said he ran a very good campaign. It's not easy. He worked very hard. I appreciate his endorsement. So, which this kind of flip-flop is not really surprising coming from Trump.
That's just politics.
I'd say that's politics.
But,
I mean, once you realize there's no clear path forward, bite the bullet. Okay, but I'm going to support the guy that might get there.
Yeah, and so coming back to that, his endorsement of Trump, I think, is going to set him up very well if Trump ever does win. And then possibly Trump might return the favor in 2028, again, assuming that he becomes president and can't run for another term.
He's term limited in Florida. In January of 2027, he will no longer be the governor of the state of Florida. He's unable to run for re-election, which is actually quite interesting, too, because Florida has become such a Republican powerhouse. So I think, in a way, almost his endorsement is pretty powerful in the state of Florida. And who knows how that endorsement can help him running for president with Donald Trump out of the picture as well. So what do you guys really think his future is? Can you see him as president, or do you think Nikki Haley will rerun? Do you think that the Democrats will take over? Do you think that Trump will leave office?
I don't foresee DeSantis ever winning a presidential election. I just don't. I think he's too conservative. He's never going to win that moderate vote. He tailors to a certain audience of the public, but he's not, I don't think, unless he changes his antics, I don't think he's going to win enough votes if he ever did run for president.
Yeah, I think the highest he could get possibly is vice president behind a more moderate Republican. If he somehow makes his way onto that ticket, it would be, that's the highest I see him going.
It's certainly a possibility. And I mean, he could run for a Senate spot, but a lot of people are disputing that. He could run for some sort of other, random public office, maybe a local office if he really wanted to. I mean, he could start a business of his own. I mean, there's many different things he could do. Obviously, his governor limit will run out at some point, but he is a charismatic person at times, and he does have a lot of success in his career. So I could see him making something of himself after all this. But being a United States president, I don't see it.
I mean, I think he's running out of options, really.
Yeah,
He
he does have a very strong support base. So I think anything he does, he could probably be successful, but definitely not on the national level. Because even looking at polls in Florida currently, actually, opinion on him is pretty evenly split, with a lot of people strongly disapproving of him, strongly approving of him. This is from, by the way, a poll done by the Florida Atlantic University. So as of 2023 in November, public opinion on him is pretty split, but I think he still has a very good support system in Florida. So maybe local, but definitely not national.
Were any of you guys shocked by him endorsing Trump in the end, or were you just like, okay, well, he signed an agreement?
He is terrified of another term of Joe Biden, along with a lot of Republicans, and he would much rather see Trump in there. And deep down, he knows Trump is the only guy that can beat Biden. So I was not surprised at all that he went out and endorsed Trump immediately after dropping out.
It's funny, Trump will never take him on stage, which is really funny. He's taken everybody else on stage. Doesn't seem like he wants DeSantis on stage. Seems
doesn't like him.
Yeah, he retired the sanctimonious nickname.
Well, the thing is, Ryan, there's more snakes in politics than there is in the Amazon rainforest.
It's very true.
These guys do not like each other,
No.
but they will work together in order to defeat their enemy, which is Joe Biden at this point in this timeline.
Well, I think the interesting thing to look at is how we were saying they were attacking each other. Now they're endorsing each other. It's just how politics work. I mean, one day you're enemies, one day you're friends. Is it real? Is it not? I don't know. But in this, it's your conservative party. You got to endorse the strong candidate because that's who you want to win. And so I'm not surprised by that endorsement. Do I think he fully meant it? No. Do I think he would rather have anyone else there? Maybe, but
I mean, I feel almost bad for DeSantis. I mean, how hard must it be to get in front of a camera and endorse the person who indirectly called you a little girl and said that you look like you walk around in your mother's heels? I mean, that was definitely a low blow to his pride. But like you said, that's how politics is. Sometimes you just have to swallow your pride and do what you need to do in order to get as far as you can go. So I think I'm not surprised. I do feel a little bad. I think it must suck for him. But at the end of the day, that's showbiz, baby. I mean, there's nothing else to say.
Well, before we wrap up, I just want to give everyone a fun fact. We're right here in State College, Pennsylvania, in 2022 for Florida governor. You know who DeSantis beat? Good guess, everybody. Democrat Charlie Crist, who was born in Altoona, just 45 minutes away from here, which is
Interesting.
Yeah,
I
which
was
is
not aware
very
of that.
surprising too. Yeah, when I searched it up, I said Altoona, really? Anyway,
Altoona to Florida, that's crazy.
Insane.
well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today here at the Politics Desk. Back to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Ryan. Stay tuned for our history panel as they discuss the first triumvirate member, Julius Caesar. We'll be right back at the desk. We're back at the desk. Now it's time for the history panel as they discuss the reason for the Ides of March himself, Julius Caesar.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm joined here today by Yaya One, Jake Santora, and Drew Comer to discuss one of the most pivotal members of history. You know him, you might not know him enough to love him. It's Julius Caesar. With the Roman Empire being recognized in relevance again, the history panel and I wanted to dive into one of history's favorite backstabbings. Literally. Okay, so guys, Julius Caesar was arguably one of the most famous characters in history. People in history.
Why?
What a great question, Jake. That is because, well, he was stabbed. He had a love affair with Cleopatra. That was another reason people knew him. He also made himself dictator of the Roman Republic. How did he do that?
For life.
Yeah.
Well, you can honestly trace back Julius Caesar's rise to power in 60 BC when he formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus. Now, this triumvirate wasn't really an alliance, it was, but they kind of backstabbed each other as much as they could to get political and powerful gain. Now, in this time, Caesar actually became consul of the Roman Empire, and he was the head military campaigner of the Gallic Wars, which was modern-day France. And Rome took over that, and in that time, he gained so much power and influence and wealth throughout Rome that the people just really loved him. In the Senate, not so much. But, you know, that's how he got his control and power.
I mean, Caesar got into his little throne, and he was ready to get stuff done. He increased the Senate from 300 members to 600 members to 900 members. And like Jake was saying, the Senate didn't like that because that dilutes their power. The Senate was traditionally made up of people from very powerful families, but Caesar allowed professionals, he allowed people from all walks of life, except for the lowest class, of course, to become magistrates and to become senators. And the people in power really weren't happy about that. Another thing that Caesar did is, I mean, he's responsible for our 365-day calendar. It's January because Caesar said it's January. He switched it from a 355-day year to 365, and he accounted for the leap days. So I'd say, besides being a dictator, he was also pretty smart and had a very good head on his shoulders.
Now it's time to talk about betrayal. And there was this guy by the name of Marcus Junius Brutus, and he was a Roman senator, but he's more known for being the famous assassin of Julius Caesar. And you would think that the guy would hate his guts. That's the reason why he would kill him. But in all honesty, that's actually very far from the truth. He actually admired Julius Caesar. He looked up to him as a politician. He looked up to him because of the fact that he defeated Pompey, and Pompey was responsible for Brutus's father's death. So the question is, why would he want him dead? And it's actually a really long answer, but Brutus came from a long family of king slayers. And so his ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, overthrew a tyrant by the name of Tarquin the Proud. And instead of taking power for himself, he and the people of Rome vowed to never let a monarch rule over Rome again. And so it was like this ethos that surrounded Brutus's name, his family, that put like a great expectation on him for him to actually do something in regards to Julius Caesar and his life. And so when Julius Caesar became dictator for life, the Senate, including Brutus, decided that they were going to kill him. Not going to mince words here. So on March 15th, Brutus and 60 other co-conspirators stabbed him to death. And so the famous last words of Julius Caesar being "et tu, Brute" is a clever line devised by William Shakespeare. And we'll never really know what his last words were, but what we do know is that these co-conspirators, these assassins, deeply underestimated Julius Caesar's popularity, and therefore the conspirators were forced out of Rome, in which a terrible civil war happened that led to Brutus and the co-conspirators' defeat, in which Brutus took his own life shortly thereafter.
Yeah, definitely. And like Drew said, when Caesar was killed on March 15th, that became the Ides of March, if you follow the Roman calendar system. But the public, again, because Caesar was so beloved, they were not happy. And so a bunch of civil wars did end up erupting, which kind of led to the downfall of the Roman Republic, which made way for the Roman Empire, where Caesar's grandnephew, but his adoptive son, Augustus Caesar, he took over and he became the new emperor or leader of the Roman Empire. So my question is, do you guys think that Caesar deserved to die? Did he deserve to be stabbed?
So my personal opinion is that political leaders are like fruit. When they get to a certain age, it's time to throw them away. So as much as I admire Caesar as a leader, as a general, and I think that he did really good for the Roman Republic at his time, eventually he was going to become a power-hungry monster. And we see this throughout history, not even just in Rome. So even though I think Caesar was a great leader and maybe he didn't deserve it morally, I mean, who really deserves to be stabbed by like 15 of like their closest friends?
Yeah.
So even though he didn't deserve it, I do think it was for the greater good, because the Roman Republic then blossomed into the Roman Empire, which is arguably the greatest empire that the world has ever seen today. Did he deserve it? No. Was it for the greater good? Sure.
Well, I understand. I do respectfully disagree. You know, dictatorships aren't really looked too fondly on throughout history, and even today. And I'm not trying to justify it, but he distributed land to the poor. He lowered taxes to the lower and middle classes. So that's where I kind of go, maybe it wasn't really justified. I'm not saying he was good as a dictator. I'm not saying that was the right move on his part. But the good that he did really outweighs what the bad that he could have done in the future. And that's kind of where I stand on it. So I'm going to have to pass on that.
You know, to go from aristocracy to autocracy is never truly a good thing, in my opinion. Every emperor that was coming after Julius Caesar was great at one thing, and that was empire expansion. That's something that we can all agree on, but they weren't necessarily great at empire maintenance. All they wanted to do was expand. These autocrats were not really shrewd businessmen, and this directly resulted in something called the Third Century Crisis, where over hiring mercenaries to consolidate land and to squash rebellion, and hyperinflation literally devastated the western part of the Roman Empire. Of course, eastern part of the Roman Empire went on up until late 1400s, but to say that going from aristocracy, which is like rule from a handful of people, to just one person, all it takes is one person to screw things up for everybody else.
I agree, but was that Caesar? Did he do enough to screw things up for the rest of everyone else?
He wasn't screwing anything up, but my argument is eventually he would have, because people were sensing that he was increasingly getting more power hungry. I mean, he was dictator, sure, and then he went and wanted to declare himself dictator for life. To me, that's a bad omen. That's a bad omen that he would have gone and continued trying to amass power to the point where his popularity would have eventually sunk. So in my opinion, I think it was best to just nip it in the bud and have him stay at his peak. And now we see how that resulted. I mean, he's glorified. People respect him. Like, he's talked about as one of the most amazing figures in history. And if he had been left alive and had gotten to that old sour age where he's just sitting on the throne and just guzzling the people's taxes, we wouldn't have the same Julius Caesar that we have today.
But do we know that was going to happen? Like, who are these people that you said he was power hungry? Do you know them?
History repeats itself, and we see it all the time. We see it with leaders to this day who have been in power for forever. So if we go based on that, history repeats itself, history occurs in cycles. to me, it was inevitable. I might not know it, I might not have been there, but that's my
Well, to go off what
counter-prediction.
Yaya said, Napoleon Bonaparte literally called himself an emperor. I mean, he dressed himself up to look like Julius Caesar. Obviously, looking at, and he was kind of extinguished in his prime as well.
Yeah.
And when he came back, he lost. It's kind of, I completely agree. I think that that's a really good point that he made.
I was actually going to take the Napoleon Bonaparte thing and take it in a different direction.
Okay.
You know, the French Revolution, the French were completely out of touch with the entirety of Europe whenever the French Revolution ended. And they were looking towards someone who could take them out of it. And Napoleon was that person. He brought them towards victory. You know, it was expansion. I know he became an emperor. He named himself an emperor. But he actually, made them such a dominant force in European society. And Caesar, he ended a century-long civil war. That's kind of the same thing. It's a parallel, honestly. And he was so respected in that time, and the French respected Napoleon whenever he was banished, as the Romans respected Julius Caesar at the time of his assassination. So that's where I kind of go I don't know. I really think.
But let's go back to why the Civil War even happened. Julius Caesar was told to come back to Rome because the people in power were kind of hesitant. They were like, he's getting a little too popular. We don't really like that. And he basically said, no, I want to stay in power. Yeah. I want to stay in power. And that's exactly why that's a very simplified version of why the Roman Civil War happened when he crossed the Rubicon. So again, even though he was a great leader, I'm not negating that at all. It would have ended in, the Roman Empire did kind of collapse at the end of it, but he might have accelerated that a little bit if he had been left in power.
I don't know, whether you agree or disagree with whether it should have happened, Caesar was definitely stabbed, so there's really nothing we can do about that. So back to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Audrey. Stay tuned for our crime panel as they cover one of the most recent updates and one of the biggest stories in crime, Jeffrey Epstein and his list. We'll meet you back at the desk. We are once again back at the desk. It's time to send it over to our final panel of the day, the crime panel, to discuss the man behind one of the most famous lists of celebrities and politicians in the world today, Jeffrey Epstein.
Thanks, Brandon. Welcome back to Crime Reviews. Today we will be diving into the well-known case of Jeffrey Epstein, whose island aided in the sexual abuse and trafficking of young females. Epstein was a well-known financial man who had ties to celebrities all around the world. While he died in prison in 2019, new information has surfaced regarding what really happened on his tropical island. I'm Samantha Rascio, and today I am joined by Eva Hines, Ryan Lowy, and Savannah Barr. All right, so first I'm going to throw it to Eva. You want to talk about kind of who was on the island and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, Jeffrey Epstein was very wealthy. So he had a lot of ties to a lot of celebrities and political figures. So when they came to the island, they were all flown to the island on Epstein's plane, which they nicknamed Lolita Express for obvious reasons. So some of the people that I thought was very interesting that came were former presidents Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. However, they both denied that they ever went to the island, which I don't really believe. With Trump, they were kind of long-term friends. They both lived on the street from each other in Florida, so they were good friends. So Trump frequently visited the island. Also, Bill Clinton denied he was ever at the island, which I think would give him a bad rep, knowing Clinton's past with younger women. Mm-hmm. Not a good look for him to have been on that island with Jeffrey Epstein. Some other names that I thought were interesting, because we can't name all, but we have Michael Jackson, Leonardo DiCaprio, Bruce Willis, Naomi Campbell, who was a Victoria's Secret model, Stephen Hawking, and Prince Andrews. Something I thought was interesting about Stephen Hawking's is that they were kind of talking about how well Epstein treated his guests on the island. He was a good host. He did everything for them. And it said that Stephen Hawking actually got a seabed tour in a submarine because he had never been underwater before. So Epstein paid for this whole submarine journey down below the surface. It was wild, very crazy. And Prince Andrews actually A lot of the employees on the island said he was very nice to them. He tipped them well. He was a good guest to them, at least on the island. So,
I think it's really interesting that Prince Andrew absolutely denies any involvement at all. But former worker for Epstein, Virginia Roberts, claims that Epstein pressured her to sleep with his friends, including Prince Andrew, and including his lawyer, too.
I mean, I think it's kind of obvious that these people are denying it. No one will come out and say, I did this. So, I mean, I feel like that's all for sexual abuse cases. A lot of the people that have these allegations towards it deny it, which is very unfortunate. Okay. But I think something that makes them kind of less likely to deny it was Epstein did have hidden video cameras in his island, which I think was important to note.
And his apartment in Manhattan.
And his apartment, because he has blackmail on all these people. And I think it was kind of a relief to him to them that maybe he did kill himself in prison, because then the blackmail would come out about them and their lives would be ruined.
Let's get to that in a minute, but first let's talk about law enforcement's response. You talked about his fame, you talked about his prominence, Leonardo DiCaprio, 2 former presidents, the list goes on and on and on, the royal family, you know, he has all these ties, so that comes to the question of why law enforcement didn't take good initiative. The FBI originally ignored the situation. The NYPD said nothing, but it's out of our jurisdiction. True, but they're powerful enough to do something about it. I mean, there's been all these situations. I do have to give a shout out to the town of Palm Beach detective Joe Riccieri. He took action. He noticed that he was being outdriven by the fame of Jeffrey Epstein, but he kept digging, got a warrant from the local county, Palm Beach County, just across the way in the city of West Palm Beach. And, you know, he really investigated the situation. Epstein did get arrested. He got arrested. He got sentenced for just 18 months.
Which is crazy.
But he didn't really have much of a sentence. His cell door was left open. He had access to a TV. He became friends with the guards. And, you know, he was out on work every day. He got to work 5 days a week, so he wasn't really in jail. And then finally, it took them just years later in the 2000s, he finally got arrested by law enforcement. They finally raided his apartment. They were finally onto his island. And they finally came about what Ghislaine Maxwell, his long-term girlfriend, her involvement in helping him. The whole situation was just a mess. And you got to give a shout out to small law enforcement agencies that knew it was up, like Joe Riccieri, Chief Michael Ryder. They overstepped their county agency because their county agency wasn't doing enough to prosecute. The state attorney's office did not do enough. They went to the federal level, and that's where they were really able to get things done. It's very rare you see that.
You know, what I think is really interesting is, besides the fear and the power he had, he also bought off so many people. He bought off Vanity Fair magazine from writing an article with interviews from 2 of his victims. And he even threatened the writer of it, who was pregnant at the time, to put a voodoo curse on her children.
And it goes to show, like, a lot of his victims were poor. They didn't have a great upbringing, so they were scared to speak out. I mean, they really didn't know any better. So he kind of chose his victims kind of strategically, because he knew they were people who didn't have power, who he could control, and wouldn't speak out based on their fear.
So, you know, they said he was a Gatsby-like figure. That's how people described him. He was a Gatsby-like figure, and it was true, because he was living in the, he was living in the old money, I am blanking, Palm Beach Township, which is a small but very rich island. Right across the way is the county seat of Palm Beach County. West Palm Beach, rich. A lot of his victims came from there. They were trying to use the $200 he would offer them every time for a massage to escape the poor situation they were in. So it was almost a Gatsby-like situation. He was on the old money side. He was taking advantage of the other side.
I think that goes to show what type of man he is. He was able to like schmooze his way into in and out of a lot of different situations.
Yeah,
Thank you. And I think that also shows by the type of people he surrounded himself with. You know, he wasn't a political figure, but he was friends with all of the presidents and even the political figures not even in the United States, which I think is very important to realize, and maybe a reason why the FBI didn't take a step in, because if they dealt with him, they would be dealing with way bigger problems when you have names like Donald Trump and Bill Clinton on the list as well.
I'd like to read this. Donald Trump of Jeffrey Epstein. I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy, he said. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Well, Mr. Former President, it's not the best thing to say. He took it back and said he hasn't spoken to him in a long time, and they had a falling out. Who knows? People said they saw Clinton on the island. Clinton said he never stepped foot on the island. So the whole situation is a mystery, and you know, the truth is we're never going to find justice because there's a lot of people involved who we're never going to know about. Alongside that, he killed himself before the trial ended.
And I think it's really interesting that the prison that he went to was so short-staffed that no one could keep an eye on him when he had previously tried to kill himself once before. And I think it's so unfair to so many of the victims that he never got the justice.
His lawyers were great too. I mean, Ken the Star was getting help from Al Dershowitz, who was in the O.J. Simpson case, really cracked that one open. I mean, the whole situation was just, I mean, I'm just going to say it, insane.
It's suspicious to me because he was such a high-profile person, because he worked with all of these people. You would think he would be kept in a place that was very high-profile, had a lot of prison guards, because this case was a big deal, and the fact that he wasn't makes it suspicious. Who did he know? Who did he know in the law enforcement industry? Who did he know in the prison that could maybe get him that less maximum security?
Well, there was even a suspicion that he didn't kill himself and that he was murdered. I know this was a big rumor going around, but the cameras did go out at the time that he committed suicide. So a lot of people thought, you know, he knew so many people that if his case went to court, he would have outed all these really famous people, and they didn't want that. So there was always a rumor going around like, did someone come in and kill him? I mean, it's very weird that a camera would go off the exact time in a prison.
I would just like to say, as we get towards wrapping up, the real failure here wasn't what Jeffrey Epstein did, it was government. Government should have done much better. Local government, the state attorney's office did not do a good job with the situation. The federal government didn't do too much better of a job either. New York did a little bit. I mean, obviously we saw their Court of Appeals taking some actions. The New York State Supreme Court said you have to come to New York because you're a level 3 sex offender now, so they did a little bit. But I mean, why is a man who is abusing women like this, taking them to a private island, watching them, I mean, he had cameras of all of them, why is he able to get out to work every day when he's in jail? Why is he getting out 7 months early? And I understand, this also puts the bail system on look too, because the bail system is not good. You shouldn't be able to pay your way out of punishment. That is bad.
This is a big issue that we're also seeing now. I mean, a lot of times when there's these sexual abuse cases, the sentences are not that severe. And I think that's something that people are starting to protest, and law enforcement is starting to hop on, but it really should be more of an issue. And like you mentioned, Ryan, I think this is a big law enforcement issue because he was such a high-profile person that something like this could be going on right now behind closed doors. There's always suspicious things happening with these types of people, and you just never know.
He was sidestepping his bail. I mean, he was supposed to be at home and work only a long time when he was out of jail 7 months early. He was flying to his private island. Private investigators who were hired said, you know, I have a picture of him leaving. He's supposed to be here. And they're like, what am I going to do? He's a celebrity.
Right, exactly.
Terrible situation. We got to work on doing things better in this country.
Right. That's all we have time left for this week. More important information on what actually happened on the island will definitely surface in the future. We hope you enjoyed learning more about this case with us. And back to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Sam. Sadly, that's all the time we have for today. In the meantime, stay updated with ATD on all of our socials and let us know what you want us to cover next. I'm Brandon Cuck, and we'll see you back next week at the desk.